Okay, now we're good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about law. Because that's where we're moving, in the law, right? Before we talked about sacrifice, and now the logos to telos has moved into law, the concept of law. But I want to talk about law a little bit. What was law like back in the Greek and the Roman era, in this era? What do you think? How many laws do you think they had?
Well, wasn't like the Hammurabi's Code one of the first laws written down?
You think they had it?
Well, they didn't have it.
No. And Hammurabi Code is really interesting. Anybody read Hammurabi's Code?
At one time.
It isn't exactly what you think. It's if you read Hammurabi's Code, I think you'll be a little bit surprised. It's not at all like the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are very specific. Hammurabi's Code is kind of different. Let's just say that. It isn't what we would expect from a law. The thing is that, you know, one of the big deals that the Greeks and the Romans admired about the Hebrews is they had a law. Now, when we say law, we think Ten Commandments, right? But remember, the Ten Commandments are a synopsis of the law. If you look back and look at the law, when the Greeks looked at the law, the Greeks weren't dummies. They read the Septuagint. They weren't like the kids in our colleges that look at the synopsis and say, that's the law. No, they actually read it because they loved reading and other things, right? So when they read it, they said, wow, these guys have a law. What do you think the law of the Greeks was like?
To promote civil order.
Well, that's what we would think, but there was no law. There was no law. Remember, it says in the Bible, every man was a law unto himself. Every man was a law unto himself. And actually, I personally believe that to a degree, that's better. Because what the Greeks did is, well, not better necessarily than Hebrew or God's law, but from a law perspective, what that meant was the Greeks believed that if you owned land, you could literally do anything you wanted on your land to your property. And if anything came on your land, it belonged to you. If a deer ran across your property, that deer was yours. If a fish came across property, if water came across your property, or air, or anything came across your property, it belonged to you. That goes back to our property rights. If somebody's tree is growing across your property, depending on the state or the statute, you can usually cut their tree. If somebody's vegetable grows into your land, you can claim their vegetables. There are claimant rights that come from both Jewish law and what we call British common law, which is really American law, but whatever. The Jews had a very strong sense of legal where they wrote down the rights of people based on property. So where the Greeks would assume, they would assume that you had property rights and rights to property, the Jews wrote it down. So, and the Jewish law is really different. It's very different than what we would consider, like for example, the Jewish law gave rights. You know, there was an expectation not of what's it called, what's that communal thing we're fighting in Florida? Customary use. There was no assumption of customary use, but there is an assumption in Jewish law that people can cross property as long as they don't damage the property. And you remember, if a poor person or a person came across your property after you gleaned your fields, they gave them rights to, the law gave them rights.
You weren't allowed to glean your fields.
Right. Well, I mean, after you cut your fields, I'm using gleaning.
Right.
But you could not completely glean your field by the law. You were to leave some of the on the ground for the poor, right? Remember that? So they weren't establishing what we would call customary use. But what would the Greeks say?
You can do whatever you want. If you want to cut your field all the way down, or
Yeah,
you can do it. It's yours.
it's yours. And if someone comes on your property, as Marek, if you remember I told you,
The trespasses.
yeah, it was trespass, but they would put in the Greeks, okay, this is gonna, okay, don't let this shock you, but you remember all those phallic symboled gods, what's the god's name? Periplus. Periplus is a god with a huge phallic symbol. They would post Periplus' pictures on fields and in front of property to tell people if they came into those fields or came into your property, they would be raped. Because in Greek law, you could punish a person almost any way you wanted. You couldn't kill them. You weren't supposed to kill them. But if they came in your property, you could punish them in almost any way you want. You could beat them, you could rape them, you could do whatever. That was ancient world law. And you say, well, what's the law? Yes, sir.
Well, they also put in various booby traps, spring guns, all kinds of things like that to discourage trespassers. And eventually that became illegal in England at one point, because people were going to the property and they get a spear in their chest or something, and they finally said, no, we don't want that anymore.
Yeah, and we call that, there's the progressive nature of law. Let me just put it to you this way. Certain people of certain persuasions believe that there is no such thing as property rights. You know, socialism and other isms like that believe there are no property rights, and therefore you have no right to prevent someone from taking your property, which is why in California and in San Francisco, almost any car in the San Francisco street is going to be broken into, because they will not enforce their laws and prevent crime. That's called progressive policing, by the way, and we're starting to see that here because we have a new police officer. I'll add that in. But the thing is that from the very beginning, property rights, and God says, thou shalt not steal, right? And that, not only that, but thou shalt not covet. The Greeks and everyone else in the world believed that if you had property and property rights, that property belonged to you. Whether it was a human, they had slavery. Their wives, that was the way of the world, or their children. They had legal rights, and we would call that law today, but it was just a cultural and social understanding, because they had no law, they just did it. The laws that came about, and by the way, who caused these laws? It wasn't the Babylonians, my friend. It wasn't Hammurabi and his code. It was the Jewish law which influenced all modern law. And I don't remember the word specifically, but all Jewish law always has a declaration, which is called a mitzvah. It has a specific clarification or a thing that specifies what the law pertains to, and then it has a punishment when you break the law. So if you go back and look at the Torah, and when we studied the Torah, I went through all this. I can't remember the exact words, but I have to go back and restudy. My point is simply this. When the Greeks say law, remember, what does the word nomos mean in Greek? Remember the word law is nomos? Remember what that word means? In Greek, nomos means the partition of property, of land, basically. So to the Greeks, law was all about land and your inherent abilities to use the property you had.
Why did the Greeks believe that, might makes right? Like, if I'm stronger than you, I can just take what you have?
No. That's why nomos, the Greeks would say that all cultures were really adverse to killing. All cultures were adverse to killing. However, they took into practice killing for two specific reasons. Number one, they believed that if you came on their property and attempted to do something like take their property or hurt them, therefore they had the right to kill you. So they took that into consideration. The other one was they believed they had the right to kill you for religious infractions. And what I mean by that is they believed, and don't take them unseriously, they literally believed, the Greeks in Athens believed that Athena was their god, and their gods were the gods of Greece. And if you did not appease the gods of Greece properly, what would happen to you? Yeah, you're not just people and individuals, but whole societies and whole peoples would be, they'd lose wars, they'd have famines, right? If you didn't appease the dryad in the tree that you took the persimmons from in the front yard of your house, what would happen? That dryad would stop producing fruit, and it's the end of your persimmons. And, you know, don't laugh. The loss of persimmons to people who are calcium and vitamin C, you know, dependent or deprived, and your children, right? And you wonder why your children are malformed. Anyway, I'll mention. I'll bring that springboard into something. But my point is this: they believed so strongly that the gods were in charge through their animism and pantheonic paganism, that if you came traipsing in and said, I'm not going to celebrate the festival to Athena, you were a risk to their culture and their society. So guess what? You're gone. So they were very, very respectful of the whole idea of shedding blood. You can see that in the sacrifice, right? To all cultures, sacrifice. They did not kill warm-blooded animals without sacrifice, and that includes birds, which are warm-blooded, right? They did not kill warm-blooded animals without sacrifice. Human beings in human life was really a huge sacred thing to them. But the most important points of this are two. Property rights. They believed they had the right to kill to protect property rights, and they also had the right to kill to protect not religious rights, but their entire culture and society because of the gods. So when we look at law, we look at law. And let me springboard. It was so important, nutrients were so important, that the British identified certain springs that they know had really high amounts of vitamin D or minerals in them, because children in the northern climates tended to get, you know what? Rickets. Rickets were a huge problem in northern climates. And so if the children drank the water from these mineral ponds, they were called sacred springs. And they're all over Britain. They're all over Sweden. They're all over Germany. The sacred springs where your children could drink the water and would ensure that their muscles and their bones were strong. And guess what? They weren't wrong. The only problem is most of these springs also produce a lot of highly radioactive minerals, which we don't know how it may have affected northern, people, but that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Apparently it didn't, but well, I don't know, if you got a funny tick in your eye, that may be what it's coming from. Anyway, I want us to be very specific about law in the ancient world. There was not law like we consider law.
So were the Hebrews the first to introduce any morality into law?
You see, now this is a beautiful question. Can you have law without morality? The answer is yeah. It depends on what your morality is. It's cultural and social, right? Because you have social and cultural mores. What happened was, and this is very important to us, what happened was the Jewish people believed that God himself, I say the word inflicted, that's not really the word, he gave them. God himself came down and told the Jewish people, these are my laws, and now these are your laws.
So are we talking about natural law, which has fallen out of favor in our society?
Natural law, now depending on how you say it, natural law and natural theology are the Ten Commandments and the law of God. That is, when you hear natural law, technically it always applies to God and the Ten Commandments. Because the thing is, and this is very important, what do you think the Jews and the Romans did when they saw the Hebrew law? We like this.
You mean the Greeks and the Romans?
I'm sorry, what did I say?
The Jews.
The Greeks and the Romans. What do you think they said? Yeah.
This makes a lot of sense.
This makes a lot of sense. This is culturally does not. Cultures, if you were to sit down and write law and you had no idea, you would write some kind of law like this, right? Because and when we studied, and we haven't studied in a long time, but when I did those classes before on how to know truth, basically, and we looked at reasoning. If you sat down and said, how do I make the best laws that fit within a governmental structure, the purpose of government being to protect private property, and that's John Locke and Mills, Stuart Mills, the purpose of government is to protect private property, which is your life, your liberty, and your property. So if I were to make a law, I would say, hey, you can't just kill me, right? Thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not steal my stuff. Right? These are laws that I would make because that's what the Greeks would say.
Because it transcends culture.
It transcends culture. And when you have both an internal and an external culture, an internal culture is like my tribe and I'm here, right? In a tribe, you don't want somebody taking your stuff, right? I mean, you may, if they came and asked you, hey, can I have a cup of sugar? Yeah, sure. But you don't want them taking your stuff, right? Yeah, that was my bridal ground, or that was the single piece of clothing that I wanted to wear. That's all I have, and you took it. That's bad, right? On the other hand, external culture. External culture is when you begin to have a trading culture. In trading cultures, you definitely, if you want to trade with me, don't take my stuff, right? If you take my stuff, that's not trade. On the other hand, if you bring me, okay, I made this bow. Here's grain, right? We trade. These, you're right, they transcend culture, both internally and externally, because they make sense for human habitation or human cohabitation in every way, right? And we see that. When laws become divisive, and this is an extra, okay, but you just think, that's your homework. Think about when laws become divisive or wrong, right? Somebody, here's my property, and the government or the law says I can't do what with my property? What did the government just do? They stole your property. Yeah, if the government, on your property, the government says I can't do this with my property. Now, the government has a right to define property, like, for example, in the past, they defined slaves, women, and children, right, as property. Well, if you define them not as property, that may be a reasonable, because now we cohabit and we co-own property. That's cool, right? That's a reasonable effect of law. On the other hand, if the government says, well, you can't make a campfire, or how about this? A deer that comes on your property, you have to have a license, and you have to be licensed by the state to shoot a deer that comes on your own property?
We do this all the time with zoning. The government tells you what you can build and where you can build it and how to build it. So they take away all that flexibility.
You know what? I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. I'm just going to point out that how ancient law fits, and then there's other things, right? And may not be good or whatever. But we do see the progress, and the important thing is to see the progression of what we would call natural law, by the way, which is what we're talking about. And it's very interesting that progression of natural law has influenced the Greeks and Romans and the Egyptians.
Well, and I want to say too that you know, kind of in defense almost of considering children, wives, slaves, property, whatever, that did afford them a really high level of protection. And when they moved out of that class, then those most vulnerables became targets and not protected, and made their lives harder. And so I think the Jewish system and whatever, the Christianity of trying to protect those who were vulnerable is important progression.
Right. Well, with that, with the children being considered property, you're also responsible for them.
Yeah.
Okay, you were liable.
Protected, yeah, liable.
They went out and
Yeah.
burned something down, you were on the hook for that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
So there was a trade-off there, but neither here nor there.
Yeah, excellent points. But, you know, okay, the class is about Greek and specifically about Hebrew, right? But if we can take lessons today from what we figure out from the Greeks and the Hebrews and others, then that might be a good thing, right? I'm just saying. So cogitate it in your brain, but remember this. The most important thing is, and it's called natural law. It is called natural law, natural theology, natural law. The idea that God provided the Hebrews laws for human existence based on what he said, and that is moral and ethics, right? You know, and then the Greeks and the Romans and other societies accepted that. You never see Hammurabi's Code written on the sidewall of a courthouse, but you always see the Ten Commandments written on the sidewalls of a courthouse, including the Supreme Court of the United States of America, which disallowed Alabama, by the way, from putting the Ten Commandments up. Just saying. Okay, here's the words of the day. This is P-E-R-I-E-L-E-I-N. And what I want you to note about this word is, do you remember yesterday or last week? This is Perry, and Perry is, should be right here. Perry is basically, this is not Perry, this is Perry, which means from perio to pierce. And it's a preposition meaning through. It means to pierce, through. And then this word right here, we had it last week. The form of this word is, I'm going to find it in my notes, airo, A-I-R-O, which means to take up or away violently, with a level of violence. It's above just taking. Remember the word taking? What's the word taking? I think we're going to hit it today. There is a gentle word in Greek for just to take, to pick up. Lambano. Lambano means to take. So if I lambano something, and actually lambano is a little bit aggressive also.
Grasp.
To grasp, yeah. Lambano means to take, but to grasp. Ario is even stronger. It means, like, for example, to lift one's voice. And why is that important? The Greek culture and society, okay, they weren't monotone, but raising your voice in the Greek world. Remember, Greek world is diakasune, right? Balance. So did you raise your voice? Did you lower it too much? No, you're supposed to be right in balance. So whatever your logical argument or your statement required, you would provide that proper voice. So to raise one's voice, that's getting a little bit, you're getting out of your diakasune, right? So anyway, this word though is a word we had last week, ario, and we had like 2 words in Greek that were formed from that word. Isn't it interesting that our authors are using words of similar makeup in different senses? I think this is the genius of the writing. We miss it totally in the translation because we can't translate that. Do you have a question?
Is it to raise your voice in anger or like a commander yelling to his troops so they can hear him, that type of raise your voice.
Well, if I'll go back to the root. So heriomai, akin to aereo, a primary root to lift up, by implication to take up or away, figuratively to raise the voice, to keep in suspense the mind, specifically to sail away, to weigh anchor. Now, I also want to throw in this other one. You notice it says, the Strong's tells us by Hebraism to expiate sin. How much you want to bet that's like a made-up thing? I mean, why would the Hebrews, number one, why would the Hebrews borrow a Greek word and make it into some totally different meaning? And why would the Greeks let them do it, right? What would the Greeks say? You're nuts. You can't take our language and just make it into whatever you want, right? And in every sense, we see the Greek words in Hebrew sense mean what they mean in Greek, like synagogue, right? So, in any case, I think that's funny. But, yeah, what is it? Is it raising the voice? Since it's suspense of the mind, I would say raising the voice would be raising the voice for whatever purpose. It doesn't matter. But remember, the point is in Dike Sune, if I'm Dike Sune and I'm talking to the troops, my voice is always at the proper level for the conditions. So if the Persians are running and they're making so much noise with their elephants that you can't hear me, and I don't raise my voice to the proper level, I'm not Dike Sune, right? On the other hand, if I'm fighting you and you can't hear me because I keep hitting you in the ear, maybe that's Dike Sune too. I'm just saying, you know, the Greek idea of balance here, and their words are specified based in that balance. So the word periereo, perielein, which is the declension, but periero means specifically to remove all around. To remove all around. To remove it all. To remove it all. And then this is the next word. D-I-E-N-E-K-E-S. Dienekes. Dienekes. This is from dia. Dia. And dia is a preposition meaning basically through. Through. What's the difference? Peri is pierced, very violent, right? The through means you're pierced. The through of peri means I have pierced you. Very violent. Dia is through as in I'm going through. One is very violent, the other is not. And believe it or not, okay, the derivative of the second part is pharaoh. Pharaoh. Pharaoh means to bear or carry. And this is really important word. Now you say, well, how did I get dienekes out of that? Dienekes is because if you notice the thing that the word pharaoh also has other cognates, other forms. And the forms are O-I-O and E-N in a gecko. These are all the same words. Okay. What does it mean if a culture has many words for the same thing? Or many word forms for the same thing? It means it's very important to the culture. So the word bear, the word to carry, to bear, to carry, and this means it's a primary word. This word specifically means to carry through. I'll let it go that Strong says this word means perpetually. I didn't look it up in the Woodhouse. I should have probably looked it up in Woodhouse because I don't think that's the primary context, but I'll go with that. I'll let it go. This will be good. So let's look at, we were at 10, and We already parsed 10, so what I'm going to do is let's read it in the NIV. And by that will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And remember, we talked about will last week. I won't talk about it again, but I think it's an important context. Okay, so here's the translation. In which determination I am made holy like the gods through the presentation, the sacrifice of the body, the sarxuke and pneuma, of Jesus Christ upon one occasion. And I'll mention this. I don't know if I mentioned this before. The idea of the will of God as determination, as opposed to the other wills of God. Like, did God want to die on a cross for the creation he made?
Of course not.
Beautiful answer. Of course not. We don't want to die for our children either, even though it's not his child. He was begotten, but he is God. So it's like you dying for that sloppy kid that never did what he was supposed to in the first place, and just spit in your eye when you gave him the gifts you gave him, and you sent him to college and he played games the whole time, and that was the end of it, right? And then he got into a sloppy thing with, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? You know, a parent might give their life for a child like that. But God so loved everyone that he was willing to die himself for it. He didn't want to do it. But his will was to accomplish that. And he accomplished his will. Period. And Jesus Christ was happy to do it. His worry wasn't that God wouldn't accept it or wouldn't accept him, or that his worry was, yeah, we wouldn't. Yeah. So you sacrifice your life, you sacrifice everything, and guess what? Yeah, it's for nothing. You know, I don't know, I believe this is so amazing. When the Greeks saw this, when the Greeks heard this message, I mean, this can't help but excite the Greeks and the Romans. I mean, this is totally their cultural thing. It's our cultural thing too, right? I mean, you can't imagine. I also want to note, and I don't know if I did this yesterday or last time, there is the word dia. They use dia instead of peri in the context of 10. And I want it to be very clear that the Greek choice, the choice of the author of the word usage is very important. I probably should have mentioned this when we parsed it. But every time we see the word usage choice, where there's more than one word in Greek, there is a reason why the authors chose that word. Hopefully in English, that's what authors are doing too. The problem with English is, how many words do we have? 1 million. Oxford Dictionary has 1 million English words. So even you don't even know, your basic vocabulary is probably around 20,000 words. You know, if you're an average person, your vocabulary is maybe around 5,000 to 10,000 words. That's what they say. You know, but if you're an educated person with a good vocabulary, you have about 20,000 words, maybe 25 max, at your fingertips. And there's 1 million words out there. Holy smoke. Yeah, and even the doctors don't know half the words that are for, you know. Anyway, let's look at 11. We're beginning to move into 11, out of the quote. Remember, the previous was a quote we have a transitional statement, and then 11. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties again and again. He offers the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. Let's look at this. I think you know where this goes. Let me remind you. We have harmantia, which is miss the mark. We have nomos, and specifically anti-nomos, which is breaking the law. This is the law, breaking the law. And then we have cleanliness. And cleanliness is Cartheos, I think. Cartheos, close to that. It's close to that. Cartheos. You have to look back in the notes, but just remember, we have these three levels. 1, 2, 3. What God really wants, don't miss the mark. What God told you, follow the law. And the beginning, cleanliness, to allow you to eat teruma, to eat the Thanksgiving sacrifice, to participate. Actually, you had to have cleanliness to participate in the sacrificial system. You had to have cleanliness. And then it took care of, well, not quite your all ananomos, but your unintentional ananomos. But the miss the mark has always been the point of God. So do you see it? There's this will thing in here, right? What does God will? What is the will of God? Do you have a question there, Dave? Or?
No.
So here let's parse it in the Greek. Kai and every, pas, every, and that's, pas means not just every, but every and all, priest. Herios, standeth, histemi. Histemi means to stand. Stands daily. Kata hemera, down the day. Daily, it would have been sufficient for them to say hemera, but instead they said down the day. Down day means literally every day. So yes, daily in English is good, but it doesn't really capture, if I just say daily, it's like, okay, so I eat breakfast daily, right? But if I say every single day I do this, that's basically what the Greek conveys. Ministering, it's not ministering, it's liatorgo. Remember the liatorgio. But this is that word, the Roman word. It's the Roman word meaning literally a servant of government, a minister of government. But they're using that word again, and they keep using that word. So literally to be a public servant, not ministering, but to be a public servant. And, Kai, prospero, that's our word, offering to bear towards. It's not oftentimes, it's polyakos, many times. The autos, the itself, thusia, sacrifices which some can, it's not can, it's kind of can, it's dunamai, it's are able, never, odepote, not even at any time. Odepote means not even at any time. Never, ever, ever, ever. Take away. Periario. To remove all around. Remove how? Violently or strongly. Remove all around. Miss the mark. Miss the mark. Here's the translation. And all priests stand down through the day, being a public servant and bearing towards many times the sacrifices themselves, which are not able even at any time to remove all around, miss the mark. The sacrifices and the cleanliness could remove. The cleanliness, the mikvah could remove whatever the taint was that prevented you from being clean. The sacrifices could remove, unintentional sin, right? The nomos. But no sacrifice can miss the mark. No sacrifice can miss the mark. You guys know the answer, right? But this is, I think, a very important point. And what it's saying it literally. I'll read it again. And all priests stand down through the day, being a public servant and bearing towards many times the sacrifices themselves, which some are not able, even at any time, to remove all around, miss the mark. To remove, miss the mark. This is both the key to Hebrews and the key to understanding. Remember I told you about law? To the Greeks, the laws of Israel are cool, but they're meh, right? Even though they're natural law, do they apply to me? I'm a Greek. They apply to me?
That's the question.
That's the question. What would the average Greek guy say? Nah, man. The Roman. No, I follow Roman law, right? The Jewish laws are not important to me. What is important to me? Miss the mark. What's important to every human being that has ever stepped on this globe? Miss the mark. Every single human being. Matter of fact, what's the most important thing to God Almighty? When Adam and Eve were set there in the garden, his goal for Adam and Eve was to hit the mark. Did he care about them sinning? Was there any law? There was no law. There was no law. God gave Adam some strictures. Did he give the strictures to Eve? Nope. But even then, there was no law. What, you got the one commandment, the two commandments, the three commandments, the five commandments? There ain't no commandments. Because God wanted them to hit the mark. That's the deal. So, to the Romans, to the Greeks, to the Alexandrians, to all the peoples, this is the appeal. The appeal isn't, oh, I broke the law, but rather, did I hit the mark? Now, we know that hit the mark. You notice I should probably write it the other way around. Cleanliness at the top, Antinomos in the middle, and then Harmentia at the bottom. Because it's a rolling down thing, right? I mean, God is happy to forgive our, well, no, I won't say that. God is not happy to have to forgive anything. But God will forgive, and if we repent, right? So to God, Antinomos ain't that big a deal. What is the big deal is what we did or did not accomplish, right? And, I want to be very specific about this. It isn't, the meaning isn't that everyone should be a Billy Graham or a Martin Luther, right? Our calling, what is your calling? Well, I don't know. You're you. Your calling is different than my calling. Your skills are different than my skills. Your DNA is different than my DNA. God has uniquely made every human being to fit a role that he has made on earth. And if everything was perfect, if every single person followed the role that they were called to do, the world would be a wonderful place. We would have technology. Everyone would have iPhones in their brains. I don't know. It would be wonderful, right? No, there would be no disease. The problem isn't God. The problem isn't nature. The problem's us, right? And every time we fail to hit the mark, guess what happens? God is a loving and gentle God. He resets the mark, right? But guess what? He wants us always to remember that we didn't hit the mark. Those things which we either fail to do or we fail to accomplish that we know we should have done, right? We pray about this all the time. This is part of our confessional prayer. Those things which I did do or didn't do, But you know what? I think God is more interested in really the things that we aim for them. Maybe we should change our confessional prayer a little bit to be, God, help me to aim for the mark that you... Well, we do. It's the Lord's Prayer, right? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's an individual prayer. And anyway, so let's move on to 12. This is the NIV. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Okay, let's parse this. I think we know where it's going from. But, day, this man, Hotos, the he. Hotos means the he. After he had prospero to bear towards, one mia, sacrifice, thusa, for the hooper over, harmantia, miss the mark, For, it's not for, it's two. Two, dianekes. They translate it perpetually. It means through, carried through. It means carried through. Perpetually is what they say, but it means carried through. Sat down. Kathesio, to sit down on, the is added, the dexios of theos. And it's not of, it's the, but you could read of. Here's what it says in the Greek, or the literal translation. But this he bore towards one, a single sacrifice over Misamark, into perpetually sat down at the right hand of God. Literally, this is a literal translation. He bore towards a single sacrifice over sin, where he perpetually sat down at the right hand of God. Okay? Carried through perpetually, you can read it either way. In other words, how could he perpetually sit down at the right hand of God? Because he's God. That's right, because he is God. Okay? What this is this a logos to telos, a logical transition that is transitioning the point. And who's the he?
Christ.
Jesus Christ.
Which
He
also-
bore toward, what's
yeah,
that?
Which proves the point there, but then about him being the high priest.
Yeah.
Just noticing probably a deliberate contrast here. The previous verse talks about the priests standing up. This verse talks about Jesus sitting down. It's just probably a deliberate proximity there to each other.
That is absolutely correct, and that is a beautiful observation. You know, as we look through that, and especially, you know, when they translated, because I missed that myself, but that is absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, what's really amazing is, remember the egrias ek nekros? All the word usages are, there is no word for resurrect, to come up from the dead, but all of them are to stand up. Egirios, and the other one is, I can't remember what it is, but anyway, Egirios ek nekros and the other one ek nekros, both of them mean to stand up from death. But then, as the sacrifice, he sits down at the right hand of God, or he is perpetually already sitting down. So I think that is absolutely a beautiful observation and a contrast to this. And also, you notice that it's not publicly ministering, right? He is the sacrifice, but he is the priest. And what Tammy said is right. It's again putting together that idea of the high priest and God, not so much king, but high priest and God, all in one, and sacrifice. So that goes back to our picture, remember? However, we are talking right now about law, right? How does the law construct into this? And also, I just want to note, you know, that was the diaknikis is, you know, that word is the one that is translated perpetually, but means carried through. So if you read this as carried through, where he carried through sat down at the right hand of God. Yes, ma'am.
How would Stephen, as he was dying, see him standing up? I think he saw Jesus standing.
Did he? I'd have to look back and see.
That was
Of course, if you gotta look at the Greek.
I don't know what it means.
Well, you gotta look at the Greek. What does the Greek say, right? Because as we've seen before, and we'll see more, there are words that we have translated that are cognates, where in the Greek it is very specific. We have translated to be more slippery or different because, I don't know if we didn't like the theology, or we just wanted to make it more exciting, I don't know.
But was Jesus sitting down because his work was done and that's what that sitting down meant? Or
No, it's
was it
because
sitting
he's God.
Because he's God.
Because
Okay.
he's God. The message that it's sending to you we know that he is God. The thing is, we believe that Jesus is God, Christ is God.
Right.
All the imagery that we have of him sitting at the right hand of God is a euphemism,
And on a throne.
right? And on a throne.
Yeah.
Because God doesn't, first of all, okay, I hate to break this to you, God ain't got a sitter. He doesn't. We have sitters, but
It says that the backside of God was showed.
But did it say a sitter? No, it says the backside. But even then, does God have a backside? Does he have a front side? No, he's a three-dimensional. Look, a four-dimensional being encroaching in the three-dimensional universe does not have a front side, a back side, or a rear side. Actually, the front side, back side are God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. But they all have all the front sides showing at once. Which, by the way, go look at some of the medieval iconography, and you'll see some of that, where they don't have three-faced God like they do in Hinduism, but they'll have all three of the Godhead in a single picture. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, let's look. We're continuing here. Since that time, he waits for his enemies to made his footstool. This is 13. Here's the parsing in the Greek. From henceforth, it's literally ho leopon, the something remaining. The something remaining. How they got from henceforth, from ho leopon, I have no idea. The something remaining, expecting. Ek dekomai. Dekomai is, I believe that's the word that I said before, means to, komai means to pick up or carry, in addition to the other ones. Anyway, ek dekomai, to accept from some source, to await, till, literally host, until his autos, it's himself, it's a reflexive pronoun. Enemies, ekthros, his hateful adversaries, be made, literally, thethemi, to place his autos, his self, footstool, it's hupopodion, something under the feet. So here's a literal translation. The something remaining accepted from some source to await till his self, hateful adversaries, are placed something under the feet to foot his self. Okay? And I was starting to write a literal translation to this to help you out. A literal, not translation, but a literal meaning thing to help you. So I guess I'm going to have to parse it at this moment, because I was trying to put it in a more simplified form than what it comes out in the Greek and English together there, literally. The something remaining accepted from some source. Okay, so what's the something remaining accepted from some source?
Sounds like a game show.
No, it does, doesn't it? Well, I guess I'll have time, I'll be able to put this in a little more understandable. That's the problem, right? We translate the Greek and we see that they're very complex forms we have to kind of think about and see how it fits properly within the context of the Logos to tell us. But in any case, thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray. Amen.